It's officially here. Round 2, Buffalo and Montreal. Two of the youngest, fastest, and most electrifying teams in the NHL have waited for their moment to arrive. And it starts on Wednesday night. After a set of round 1 bouts that saw styles make up the fight, a new challenge awaits because the Sabres and Habs are reflections of one another. When all things are equal, who has the edge? Will we see craziness in Quebec or a wild scene in Western New York? Hello and welcome. I'm Ryan Lee, and welcome to Sabres Digest. All things Buffalo Sabres will be here on Sabres Digest, latest news, reactions, updates, and more. So subscribe down below to follow along for the journey, and thank you so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to us. Round 1 saw somewhat of a changing of the guard, with Boston and Tampa being eliminated and Buffalo and Montreal going through. And this paves the way for a series that could be potentially one of the more electrifying series throughout the entire playoffs, considering the styles that these two play, how they mirror one another, and how they both come with pace, scoring, a little bit of physicality in the mix, but also just the overall young stars who are waiting for their time to finally arrive. And with Montreal and Tampa, that was a really scrappy series that went the distance to 7. One of the closer series we've ever seen since the playoff format changed in 2024. And only 2 other series in the last dozen years since the conference realignment happened have there been any tighter series. Montreal and Tampa playing at a 1-goal margin for pretty much the entire time, much different to what Boston experienced with Buffalo. In the Boston-Buffalo series, there were points where the teams separated one another, whether if it was the potential for comebacks or, in the case of Game 4, just putting the game away as quickly as possible. But when you have long, stretched out series that just are grueling and lengthy, that can really take a toll on a team, especially in the long run, both in the physical aspect and the mental aspect. You could make the current argument that it makes them more ready for this type of moment, but in the playoffs, everything adds up over time. And this could be a potential series where it's just been a lot of extra hockey that Montreal has played, and that could work in the Sabres' benefit, considering that Tampa and Montreal went the distance 4 times in this series. They went to extra time 4 times. And in doing so, they played nearly triple the amount of overtime that Buffalo played. You had the half a period in Game 5, but you have 4 games totaling 25 minutes of OT between the Habs and the Bolts. And even though we've seen a lot of these young guns step up in these big moments, it's going to really be a lot of the same thing between Buffalo and Montreal. Who are the young stars? Who are the top guys that you're going to have or expect to show up when this time comes? Whether it's at KeyBank Center or Sancho Bell, this is a stage and a platform to really show some of the best in the NHL, considering that these were 2 of the top 6 teams in the entire regular season throughout this past season. And through turmoils and tribulations of not making the playoffs, or in Montreal's situation, having a decline after making that first cup final back in the bubble, it's a refresh not only for these 2 teams, but also for the National Hockey League. You can't have your same usual suspects like the Leafs or the Panthers or the Tampa Bay Lightning. You have to have some fresh blood just to cycle out there and really just make things intriguing overall. And it's one thing if you just had fresh teams in the mix who come in and they flame out. It's another when they are so close to each other in almost every aspect that they've actually been able to perform and step up come the playoffs. And this is a comparison head-to-head of what these 2 teams have done. They have not met each other in the playoffs since 1991. This has been 35 years in the making between the Habs and the Sabres. And just looking at just the playoff numbers in round 1, it's actually been pretty tight, all things considered. You have a slight differential in the number of goals scored and the number of goals allowed. And even in terms of the shooting metrics and high danger chances, they are so close against each other. However, the expected goals is where things get a little bit mucky, because the Sabres have had a lot of better opportunities and a higher XG, lower goals against average or expected goals against average throughout this entire playoff. But you could also argue that's just because they had a weaker matchup in Boston, who a lot of people kind of knew going into that they weren't really going to match up to what Buffalo was going to do. But when you have 2 teams who are so like-minded, anything is up in the air. It is an absolute coin toss on what these 2 teams could do. But if Montreal want to have any chance at beating Buffalo, they're going to need their guys to step up. But also, this is a task for Buffalo's defense to keep shutting the Montreal Stars down. Because in the Tampa series, they didn't exactly get off to the hottest start. And hopefully, for the sake of the Sabres, that trend remains. Cole Caulfield with only a singular goal through 7 games, which came on the power play. And then you have Juraj Slafkovsky, who had a hat trick in Game 1, including the overtime winner, but hasn't done anything since. And in the playoffs, a lot of what succeeds and what fails is a lot of what have you done for me lately, and how have those series of events kind of escalated throughout the playoffs. And it seems like Montreal used a lot of the committee to eventually take out Tampa when all is said and done. But when you look at the top line of Caulfield, Suzuki, Slafkovsky, that's your Game 7 top line. And in the entire playoffs, they have 0 goals and 4 goals against. That is absolutely benefit to Buffalo, considering that we've already broken down how great Krebs, Thompson, and Tuch have been in the Boston series. And we also went through how good the Sabres defense has been and how good Alex Tuch has been. But against one another, these two are as tight as you can get. And it's not just a chance for the depth to galvanize their opportunities, but also for the top guys on both sides to really take over this game. We just mentioned how Montreal Stars players were maybe a little quiet going into that playoff series against Tampa, but against a different opponent who might have some things open up for them, it could be their chance to finally wake up and get in gear. And for the Sabres, they're going to have to do the exact same. Some of their top stars are going to have to get in gear and start making their contributions against the Montreal team that might do the exact same thing, just based on styles. Boston knew they wanted to clog things up, but with Montreal, it's really going to be a mixed bag. But when you look at what they did against Montreal, the top Sabres players, there was a lot of success to be had, especially with Tage Thompson. He was a point per game nearly in the opening round, but against the Montreal Canadiens, he is near double that. When these two played in the regular season, there were no fewer than 6 combined goals between the two teams, which provides a lot of opportunity for the offensive stars to really shine. Although Tage Thompson usually does in the regular season, he has been kind of just a supporting character throughout this entire playoffs. But if he can match this type of production against Montreal the same way he did in the regular season, expect Tage to no longer be an understudy or no longer to be a backup character. He could absolutely turn himself into one of the big heroes of the story throughout this entire series, which I expect to go 7. And when you have an opponent like Buffalo and Montreal who can match each other stride for stride, you have to find advantages anywhere you're able to get to them. And one of the places where the Sabres could actually excel is in goal, considering that Jakub Dobes, he's had a bit of an up and down playoff. He's had a really great playoffs overall, but when you look at some of the expected goal numbers and some of the analytics, it doesn't really paint the full picture of what you might see on the screen or when you kind of go back and forth. There were some goalie duels where Dobes absolutely bailed him out. We can get that straight. And we can also argue that Dobes outbattled Vasilevsky. No one else in this entire playoff has outmatched a Hall of Fame level goalie like Andrei Vasilevsky when your own team only has 9 shots on goal. That never happens. But Jakub Dobes came out of that at the end of the day. And he was actually really solid, all things considered, throughout the playoffs. It was just a match of styles against Tampa. And he actually has been one of the more electrifying young prospects throughout this entire playoff run. And if we're going to go back into a little bit of history, we've seen a rookie goaltender burn the Buffalo Sabres before, who maybe wasn't the expected starter going into the year, but took over late on in the year, had a great playoff run, and it paved the way for the Carolina Hurricanes to win the Stanley Cup back in 2007 when Cam Ward made his introduction into the league. This is Jakub Dobes' time in the playoffs right now. He has come in and said, I am here and I am here to stay. And he has absolutely shown that he is going to be the Montreal Canadiens' future as the heir apparent to Carey Price. Montembeault didn't fit the bill. And they've been searching since. And Dobes has finally come since his time at Ohio State. And when everything is so equal, it's just so up the middle. There really is no edge. You could really toss it up to the flip of a coin. Everything counts. Everything matters. We really don't know what's going to happen in this series. Usually I've talked about a lot of things. I've talked about analytics. I've talked about styles. I've talked about tape. And I've even talked about Vegas. Even they don't know what's going to happen. Even they chalked it up to the flip of a coin. Because that's how evenly matched these teams are. But in the playoffs, you could argue this is what you want. If this wasn't a potential Eastern Conference final, at the very least we have it in round 2. Because we don't want to have a Minnesota-Dallas situation all over again. But when all things are equal, when everything is pretty split down the middle, that's really where uncertainty lies. And I will be the first person to admit, I don't know what's going to happen. The excitement to find out and to make that discovery is what we're here for. And all we know is that you have two of the loudest and most passionate fan bases across the National Hockey League going toe-to-toe. We're either going to see one of two things happen. We're either going to see some crazy scenes in Quebec, some mayhem in Montreal, or we might see some bedlam in Buffalo, and whatever wildness can come out of Western New York. But I'm excited to see it. This is a playoff series that has not been seen since 1991 in the Adams division. And that's probably the most exciting part about this matchup is there's no history. Or rather, plenty of history, just ancient history. And it's time to write a new chapter. But we have the two youngest teams who have been waiting for this moment. They're chomping at the bit, and now they're finally arrived. The rebuilds are finally over. This is the time to harvest the fruits of the labor. And the unfortunate reality is the greatest obstacle of these two teams who endure these long rebuilds are each other. So it's all this uncertainty, this back and forthiness, where everyone says that this is down the middle. All we can do is wait for Wednesday, sit back, enjoy the show, and expect the fireworks to go off. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ryan Lee. For all things Buffalo Sabres, your latest news, reactions, updates, and more, hit subscribe down below. But also comment your thoughts and opinions. I love reading them. I love interacting with them. And it really helps gauge the overall thought process of everything going on, game in and game out. I appreciate everything you guys do. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good one. And as always, go Sabres.